I stared at 65 birthday candles waiting for people who never came. That was the moment I realized something in my family had changed long before my birthday arrived. My name is Loretta Miller, and on the morning of my 65th birthday, I woke up happier than I had been in years. The sun was shining through the kitchen window. The weather forecast promised a beautiful spring afternoon. For weeks, I had planned a small family gathering at my house. Nothing extravagant, just dinner, cake, laughter, and the people I loved most. I spent the entire morning preparing. I arranged fresh flowers in the dining room. I polished the silverware that had belonged to my mother. I baked David's favorite apple pie from scratch, even though he was 41 years old now and could easily buy one himself. Old habits stay with a mother. Around noon, I carefully placed the birthday cake in the center of the dining table. White frosting, blue decorations, 65 candles waiting to be lit. Looking at it made me smile. My son had promised they would arrive by 3 o'clock. Jennifer had even texted me 2 days earlier saying everyone was excited. At least, that was what she wrote. By 2:30, everything was ready. The food stayed warm in the oven. The drinks were chilled. Music played softly through the speakers in the living room. I checked my phone. Nothing. 3 o'clock arrived. No cars pulled into the driveway. No messages appeared. No phone calls came. I told myself traffic was probably heavy. Families run late. It happens. At 3:15, I checked my phone again. Nothing. At 3:30, I walked to the front window and looked outside. The street remained quiet. A delivery truck passed by. A neighbor walked her dog. Life continued normally. My birthday did not. By 4 o'clock, the excitement I had carried all morning began turning into confusion. I called David. The call went straight to voicemail. I waited 5 minutes and called again. Voicemail. Jennifer did not answer either. I sent a text asking if everything was all right. No response. I sat alone at the dining table staring at 6 empty chairs. 1 hour later, the food remained untouched. The cake remained perfect. The house remained silent. I tried not to think the worst. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone got sick. Maybe something unexpected happened. Families do not simply forget a 65th birthday. At least that was what I kept telling myself. By 6 o'clock, the sunlight outside had started fading. The candles were still waiting. So was I? My phone finally vibrated. My heart jumped. I grabbed it immediately. The screen showed a notification from social media. Not a message. Not a phone call. Just a notification. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed Jennifer's name attached to the alert. Curious, I opened the app. The first photo appeared instantly. My smile disappeared. There was Jennifer standing on the deck of a luxury cruise ship. Behind her stood David. Beside them were several relatives. My relatives. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked happy. The caption underneath the photo read, "Perfect family getaway. Making unforgettable memories." I stared at the screen. My hands suddenly felt cold. I swiped to the next photo. Then another. Then another. Every person I had invited to my birthday was there. Every single one. On a cruise ship. Together. The date stamp showed it had started that very morning. The same morning I had been decorating my dining room. The same morning I had been baking pies and arranging flowers. Not one person had told me about the trip. Not one person had called. Not one person had warned me. I sat frozen in my chair as the reality slowly settled over me. Then my eyes landed on something in the background of the final photograph. Something that made my stomach tighten. Because standing beside Jennifer was a woman I barely recognized at first. And the look they were sharing told me this trip had never been an accident. For several minutes, I sat alone at the dining table staring at the photographs on my phone. The birthday candles remained unlit. The food was growing cold. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the yard. Yet I could not stop looking at those pictures. The woman standing beside Jennifer in the final photo was her friend Melissa. I had met her only twice. Both times, she seemed pleasant. Enough. But what caught my attention was not who she was. It was the way Jennifer was looking at her. They were smiling at each other while everyone else stood around them. It looked less like a family vacation and more like a celebration of a plan that had worked exactly as intended. I immediately opened the comments below the photos. Dozens of relatives had left messages. Have a wonderful trip. So happy everyone made it. Best family vacation ever. My eyes moved slowly across the screen. Everyone made it. Those 3 words hurt more than anything else. Everyone made it except me. I scrolled further. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. One of my cousins had commented, Thanks again, Jennifer, for organizing everything months ago. Months ago. I read the comment twice. Then a third time. Months ago. This trip had not been a last-minute decision. It had been planned for a long time. While I had been looking forward to my birthday dinner, everyone else had apparently been preparing for a cruise. My phone felt heavier in my hands. I opened my text messages and searched through old conversations with Jennifer. The more I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. Over the previous year, there had been several occasions when family gatherings seemed to happen without me. A weekend barbecue I heard about afterward. A holiday shopping trip nobody mentioned. A family photo session I only discovered through social media. Each event seemed small at the time. Easy to explain away. Easy to forgive. Looking at them together was different. A pattern began to emerge. Around 7 o'clock, my phone finally rang. My heart jumped. I glanced at the screen. It was David. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. Surely my son would explain everything. I answered immediately. David. There was a short pause. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded distracted. Background music and laughter echoed behind him. Are you all right? He asked. I almost laughed at the question. Am I all right? Another pause followed. Mom, I know you are probably upset. Probably upset. Those words settled heavily in the silence between us. David, I said carefully, did you know today was my birthday? The laughter in the background suddenly seemed louder. Of course I knew. Then why am I sitting alone? Silence. Long enough to tell me everything. Finally he sighed. Jennifer thought it would be easier this way. Easier. I stared at the untouched birthday cake. Easier for who? He did not answer immediately. Mom, we can celebrate when we get back. I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, I understood this was not an accident. It was not an emergency. It was not bad timing. They had made a choice. I see, I said quietly. Mom. I ended the call before he could continue. Then I sat there in silence. The house felt larger than usual. Emptier. I stood up and began clearing the table. One plate at a time. One glass at a time. One disappointment at a time. As I carried the dishes into the kitchen, my phone vibrated again. This time it was not David. It was a message from an unknown email address. The subject line contained only 6 words. Important information regarding Jennifer Miller. I stared at the screen. Something deep inside me said I should delete it and move on. Instead, I opened the message. And what I saw there changed everything. For several seconds, I simply stared at the email on my screen. My first instinct was to assume it was spam. The sender's address was unfamiliar. There was no company name, no signature, no explanation, just a single attachment and one short sentence. You deserve to know what has been happening. My heart began to beat a little faster. I hesitated before opening the attachment. The house was completely silent around me. The birthday cake still sat untouched in the dining room. The flowers I had arranged that morning were beginning to droop. Everything felt strangely distant as I tapped the file. It opened immediately. The first page appeared to be a collection of screenshots. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized Jennifer's profile picture beside several messages. My stomach tightened. The messages were months old. Some were nearly a year old. Jennifer had been communicating with multiple relatives in a private family group. As I continued reading, an uncomfortable feeling settled over me. The conversations were not openly cruel. In fact, they were written casually, almost carelessly. That somehow made them worse. One message discussed holiday plans. Another discussed a family barbecue. Another mentioned a weekend trip. Again and again, I noticed the same detail. My name appeared. Then Jennifer would respond with some version of the same suggestion. Maybe it is better not to tell Loretta yet. Let us keep it simple this time. She might not enjoy it anyway. I felt my chest grow heavy. The exclusion had not started with my birthday. It had been happening gradually, quietly, consistently. One message stopped me cold. It had been sent 6 months earlier. A cousin had suggested holding a family dinner at my house because everyone enjoyed gathering there. Jennifer replied almost immediately. That is sweet, but we should start creating traditions that do not revolve around Loretta. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I set the phone down and rubbed my forehead. For years, I had blamed myself whenever I felt disconnected from the family. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself younger families were simply busy. I told myself not to be sensitive. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen, I was looking at evidence that the distance had been carefully encouraged. I picked up the phone again and continued reading. The final screenshot contained a conversation from 3 months earlier. A relative had asked whether anyone had plans for my 65th birthday. Jennifer responded with a laughing emoji and wrote that the family cruise would happen during the same week. One person questioned whether that might hurt my feelings. Jennifer's answer was brief. She will get over it. I stared at those 4 words longer than any of the others. She will get over it. Not because they were dramatic. Not because they were cruel. Because they were dismissive. As though my feelings had become an inconvenience. As though decades of family dinners, babysitting grandchildren, hosting holidays, and showing up whenever someone needed help could be reduced to a minor obstacle. Then I noticed something attached at the bottom of the email. A second document. Unlike the screenshots, this one was a scanned copy of an old email chain. The date immediately caught my attention. It was nearly 8 years old, long before many of the recent problems began. Confused, I opened it. The names involved were familiar. Jennifer, David, and a local attorney. My pulse quickened. Why would an attorney be included in a family email from 8 years ago? I began reading slowly. The first few lines seemed ordinary. Then I reached a paragraph that mentioned my house. Not David's house. Mine. The house I had owned for over 30 years. Suddenly, every trace of birthday disappointment vanished. Because for the first time, I realized this story might never have been about a cruise vacation at all. Late that night, I sat alone in my living room with the old email chain open on my laptop. The clock on the wall read almost midnight, but sleep felt impossible. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, my entire understanding of the last several years was beginning to change. I adjusted my reading glasses and carefully went through the messages again. The email chain started with what appeared to be an ordinary discussion about estate planning. At the time, I had recently retired from teaching. My house had been fully paid off for years. It was not a mansion, just a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a good neighborhood. The kind of house where birthdays were celebrated, holidays were hosted, and grandchildren were spoiled. The attorney involved had been answering questions about future ownership options. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed who was asking most of the questions. Jennifer. Not David. Not me. Jennifer. 8 years ago, she was already discussing long-term possibilities regarding property that did not belong to her. One email in particular caught my attention. Jennifer asked whether transferring ownership through a family arrangement could simplify future inheritance concerns. The attorney responded that any changes would require my direct participation and consent. The conversation ended there, but the question itself lingered in my mind. Why had she been thinking about my house so many years earlier? I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Memories began surfacing one after another. Jennifer encouraging me to consider downsizing. Jennifer suggesting retirement communities. Jennifer casually mentioning that large houses were difficult for older people to maintain. At the time, I interpreted those comments as concern. Looking back now, they sounded different. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Hello. A hesitant female voice responded. Loretta? Yes. My name is Susan Parker. I am your cousin's wife. I immediately recognized the name. We saw each other at family gatherings several times a year. Susan, I know this is late. I am sorry. She sounded nervous. I almost did not call. I sat up straighter. What is this about? There was a long pause. I saw Jennifer's cruise photos tonight. Then I heard about your birthday. My chest tightened. Susan took a deep breath before continuing. Loretta, there is something you deserve to know. I listened quietly. Several relatives felt uncomfortable about that trip, she said. Some people asked whether you had been invited. And another pause followed. Jennifer told everyone you preferred staying home. She said large family events had become stressful for you. I closed my eyes. I never said that. I know. Susan's voice softened. That is why I am calling. She continued speaking for nearly 20 minutes. With every detail, the picture became clearer. Jennifer had spent years shaping a narrative about me. Nothing dramatic. Nothing outrageous. Just small comments repeated often enough that people eventually accepted them as truth. Loretta likes being alone. Loretta does not enjoy traveling. Loretta gets overwhelmed easily. Loretta prefers quiet birthdays. Individually, each statement sounded harmless. Together, they slowly pushed me to the edge of my own family. By the time the call ended, I felt exhausted. Not because I had learned something entirely new, because someone had finally confirmed what my instincts had been trying to tell me for years. Before hanging up, Susan said one final thing. There is another reason I wanted to call. I gripped the phone tighter. What reason? Her answer came immediately. The person who sent you those documents was not the only family member who noticed what was happening. I froze. What do you mean? Susan lowered her voice. Because someone else kept records too. And what they found goes far beyond a missed birthday party. Late the next morning, I received another email. Unlike the first one, this message came from Susan directly. There was no greeting, no explanation, only a short sentence and 3 attachments. I downloaded them immediately. My hands were shaking before I even opened the first file. The documents were organized by date. Whoever had assembled them had been careful. Very careful. The first file contained screenshots of conversations between various family members over several years. Most of them seemed harmless. Birthday planning, holiday schedules, weekend gatherings. But a pattern quickly emerged. Every time my name appeared, Jennifer somehow managed to redirect the conversation. If someone suggested inviting me, she would mention that I was probably busy. If someone asked whether I wanted to attend an event, she would respond before anyone contacted me directly. Sometimes she claimed she had already spoken to me. Sometimes she said I preferred staying home. Sometimes she simply changed the subject. Reading everything together felt like watching someone slowly erase me from my own family one conversation at a time. I opened the second file. This one contained notes written by a relative I rarely saw. Apparently, he had become concerned years earlier. He documented family events I had missed, gatherings I never knew existed, vacations discussed without me, holiday dinners arranged while I was told everyone was unavailable. The list stretched for pages. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the dates. Some memories returned immediately. Christmas 3 years ago when I ate dinner alone because David said everyone was staying home with the flu. A summer barbecue that supposedly never happened until photographs appeared online weeks later. A family reunion I learned about after it ended. At the time, I accepted every explanation. Now those explanations looked very different. Then I opened the third file. The moment I saw the contents, I stopped breathing for a second. It was not a conversation. It was not a family message. It was a copy of public property records. My property records. I adjusted my glasses and leaned closer to the screen. Several years earlier, someone had requested information regarding my home's estimated market value. That alone was not unusual. Public records are public records. What caught my attention was the timing. Requests appeared again and again over multiple years. The name attached to the inquiries was not David's. It was Jennifer's. I scrolled further. There were notes about neighborhood values, comparable sales, future development plans, tax assessments. The level of interest seemed excessive for someone who did not own the property. My chest felt tight. I pushed my chair back and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Children rode bicycles. A mail truck moved slowly down the street. Yet I suddenly felt like I was seeing my own life through a different lens. The house around me was more than a building. It was where David learned to ride a bike, where family photographs filled the hallway, where every Thanksgiving dinner had been served for decades. Jennifer's interests suddenly seemed far less casual than I once believed. My phone rang before I could gather my thoughts. It was Susan again. "Did you read everything?" she asked. "Yes." Her voice lowered. "There is one thing I forgot to tell you." I sat down slowly. "What is it?" Susan hesitated. "About a year ago, Jennifer told several relatives that you were planning to sell the house." I frowned. "That is impossible. I never said that." "I know," Susan replied. "That is why people were confused when it never happened." Silence filled the line. Then she added one final detail. "Loretta, according to what I heard, Jennifer was already talking about what she wanted to do with the property after you moved out." I stared across the room at the family photographs hanging on the wall. Suddenly, the missed birthday felt smaller than ever. Because the more I learned, the more it seemed that someone had been planning a future without me in it for a very long time. Late that afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I opened the fireproof box in my bedroom closet. It sat on the top shelf behind old photo albums and tax records. Most of the documents inside had not been touched since my retirement. I carried the box to the dining room table and began sorting through the contents one folder at a time. Property records, insurance paperwork, savings accounts, old wills, Decades of ordinary documents that represented an ordinary life. I was not looking for anything specific. At least that is what I told myself. The truth was that I suddenly wanted to know exactly where I stood. If Jennifer had spent years paying attention to my affairs, perhaps it was time I did the same. As the afternoon sunlight moved slowly across the room, I reviewed every page carefully. Most of what I found was familiar. Then I reached a folder labeled estate planning. I almost set it aside. Then I remembered the attorney from the old email chain and decided to open it. Inside was a collection of documents I had signed years earlier with my own attorney. I read through them slowly. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. The house belonged entirely to me. It had always belonged entirely to me. No transfer agreements existed. No future ownership promises had been made. No one had been added to the deed. I felt a small sense of relief. Whatever assumptions Jennifer may have been making, they were not based on reality. Then I found something else. A letter from my attorney written several years earlier after one of our annual reviews. I vaguely remembered the meeting, but not the details. The letter summarized recommendations we had discussed. One paragraph immediately caught my attention. It referenced a trust that had been established as part of my long-term planning. My pulse quickened. I continued reading. The trust had been created primarily to protect my assets and simplify future administration. I remembered signing the paperwork, but had not thought about it since. What surprised me was a specific clause highlighted in the attorney's notes. The trustee retained complete discretion regarding future beneficiaries. In other words, no one had a guaranteed expectation of receiving anything. I sat back in my chair. For years, I had assumed David would eventually inherit the house simply because he was my son. We had never formally discussed it. It was just an assumption. Yet legally, nothing had been promised. Nothing had been guaranteed. A strange feeling settled over me. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Clarity. For the first time, I realized how much of this situation seemed built on expectations that existed only in other people's minds. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from David. The first direct message he had sent since the cruise photographs appeared. I opened it immediately. Mom, Jennifer says you seem upset. We should talk when we get back. I stared at the screen. Not I heard you were hurt. Not I am sorry. Not happy birthday. Just Jennifer says you seem upset. I set the phone down without responding. A few minutes later, another message arrived. This one came from an unfamiliar number. My stomach tightened immediately. The message contained only one sentence. If you would like to understand why Jennifer became so interested in your house, check the county records from last September. No name. No explanation. Just another clue. I looked out the window as evening settled over the neighborhood. The unanswered questions were multiplying faster than the answers. Yet one thing had changed. A week earlier, I would have ignored a message like that. I would have assumed there was a misunderstanding. Now, after everything I had learned, I was no longer willing to dismiss the signs. I opened my laptop, logged into the county records website, and entered the date mentioned in the message. Within seconds, a list of public filings appeared on the screen. Most were routine. Then one entry stopped me cold. Because attached to a property inquiry involving my address was a name I never expected to see. Late that evening, I clicked on the record and waited for the document to load. My eyes remained fixed on the screen as the county website slowly displayed the details. The inquiry had been submitted 11 months earlier. The address listed was mine. The property description matched perfectly, but the name attached to the request was not Jennifer's. It was David's. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My son had never mentioned any of this. Not once. I read the record again. Then again. The inquiry itself was not illegal or even unusual. Homeowners and family members look into property information all the time. What unsettled me was the timing. 11 months earlier was the same period when several of the family conversations had taken place. The same period when relatives were being told I preferred staying home. The same period when Jennifer had reportedly been discussing future plans involving my house. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my temples. For several minutes, I simply sat there thinking about David. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle in the driveway. I remembered helping him move into his first apartment. I remembered the pride I felt on the day he got married. None of those memories matched the picture forming in front of me now. My phone vibrated. Another message from David. Mom, we will be back tomorrow afternoon. Maybe we can all have dinner together. The timing felt strange. For days there had been silence. Now suddenly there was urgency. I typed several responses and deleted each one. Eventually, I sent only 3 words. We can talk. His reply arrived almost immediately. Great. Jennifer wants to clear the air too. Clear the air. I stared at the phrase for a moment before setting the phone aside. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. The house felt peaceful. For the first time since my birthday, I no longer felt confused. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But not confused. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together. Around 10 o'clock, Susan called again. Her voice sounded relieved when I answered. I heard they are coming back today, she said. Yes. There was a pause. Loretta, before you meet with them, there is something else you should know. My stomach tightened. What is it? Susan hesitated briefly. Several months ago, Jennifer approached 2 relatives asking questions about your future plans. What kind of questions? Whether you intended to move. Whether you had updated your estate documents. Whether you planned to keep the house. I looked out the window toward the backyard. Why would she ask them instead of asking me? Susan sighed softly. That is exactly what made people uncomfortable. After the call ended, I spent the rest of the morning organizing the documents I had gathered. The screenshots, the emails, the property records, the attorney's letter. I placed everything neatly inside a folder. Not because I planned to accuse anyone. I simply wanted the facts in one place. Shortly after 3 o'clock, a familiar SUV pulled into the driveway. My heart beat a little faster. David stepped out first. Jennifer followed. Both were smiling, carrying shopping bags and souvenirs from the cruise. As though nothing unusual had happened. As though a missed birthday was a minor misunderstanding. I watched from the front window as they approached the house. David looked nervous. Jennifer looked confident. Very confident. The kind of confidence people have when they believe they already know how a conversation will end. A few minutes later, we were seated around the dining room table. The same table where I had waited alone on my birthday. Jennifer placed a gift bag in front of me and smiled warmly. We brought you something special from the cruise. I looked at the bag but did not open it. Then I looked at both of them. Before we talk about gifts, I said calmly, there are a few things I would like to understand. The smile on Jennifer's face faltered for the first time. Because she suddenly realized this conversation was not going to unfold the way she expected. For a moment, nobody spoke. The dining room felt unusually quiet. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains and stretched across the table between us. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jennifer maintained her smile, but I could see the tension beginning to form around her eyes. What would you like to understand? She asked lightly. I reached for the folder beside me and placed it on the table. Neither of them had noticed it before. I would like to understand why everyone in the family was told I preferred spending my birthday alone. Jennifer's smile disappeared completely. David looked surprised. What are you talking about? He asked. I opened the folder and removed several printed screenshots. I am talking about this. I slid the pages across the table. David picked them up first. As he read, his expression changed. Jennifer remained perfectly still. Mom, David said quietly, where did you get these? That is not the important question. I looked directly at Jennifer. The important question is whether they are true. Silence filled the room. Jennifer finally crossed her arms. People say things in private conversations all the time. Did you tell relatives I wanted to be left alone? I asked. She hesitated. I may have simplified things. Simplified things. I almost laughed at the phrase. You organized a cruise during my birthday. You told people not to invite me. You told them I preferred staying home. That is not simplifying. That is deciding for me. David lowered the papers and looked at his wife. Jennifer. She immediately turned toward him. You are making this sound much worse than it was. I watched the two of them carefully. For the first time, David appeared genuinely confused. Not defensive. Confused. As though pieces of information were falling into place for him as well. I reached into the folder again. This time, I removed copies of the property inquiries. There is more. Jennifer's posture stiffened. I placed the documents in front of them. David scanned the pages quickly. What is this? Public records, I replied. Questions about my house. Questions asked repeatedly over several years. Jennifer immediately leaned forward. There is nothing wrong with looking at public records. No, I agreed calmly. There is not. The room grew quiet again. Then I added, what interests me is why you were discussing my future living arrangements with relatives before ever discussing them with me. David looked up sharply. Living arrangements? Jennifer turned toward him. It was just conversation. I could see the confidence slipping away now. Not dramatically, just enough. The certainty she had carried into the house was slowly disappearing. I opened the final section of the folder and removed the letter from my attorney. A few days ago, I reviewed my estate documents. Jennifer's eyes immediately moved toward the papers. Why? She asked. Because someone spent years showing unusual interest in them. No one spoke. I continued calmly. What I learned was surprisingly simple. I folded my hands together. My house belongs entirely to me. It always has. David frowned. Mom, nobody is disputing that. Good, I replied. Because there is more. I watched Jennifer carefully. The trust established years ago gives me complete authority over future decisions regarding every major asset I own. For the first time, genuine alarm flashed across her face. Only for a second, but I saw it. So did David. He looked from me to her and back again. Jennifer, he said slowly, why are you so concerned about this? She opened her mouth and then closed it. The answer never came. Instead, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Finally, I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Ordinary. Nothing like the tension inside the house. You know, I said softly. For days I thought this was about a birthday. I turned back toward them. Now I realize it was never about that. Neither of them spoke. It was about respect. David lowered his eyes. Jennifer stared at the table. And in that moment, I realized the conversation had already changed everything. Because for the first time, the truth was no longer hidden behind excuses. The silence that followed felt different from any silence that had come before. It was no longer filled with confusion, assumptions, or unanswered questions. The truth had finally entered the room, and once it was there, none of us could pretend otherwise. David remained seated, staring at the documents spread across the table. Jennifer looked exhausted. Not defeated, not angry, just exhausted. For the first time in years, there were no explanations left to hide behind. After several minutes, David finally spoke. Mom, I honestly did not know about some of this. His voice sounded quieter than I had ever heard it. I believed him, not because he was perfect, not because he had handled everything well, but because the look on his face reminded me of the little boy who used to confess when he broke something and could not figure out how to fix it. I know, I said gently. Jennifer looked up. You think I planned all of this? I considered her words carefully. No, I replied. I think you made a series of choices. Small choices. Over many years. She lowered her eyes. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I continued. The problem is not one cruise. It is not one birthday. It is not even one conversation. The problem is that those choices slowly pushed me farther away from people I love. David leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. I should have paid more attention. No one argued with him. Because it was true. We all could have paid more attention. Family relationships rarely break in a single day. More often, they fade one small decision at a time. The conversation lasted another hour. There were apologies. Some sincere. Some awkward. Some incomplete. No dramatic confessions appeared. No shocking revelations suddenly changed everything. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, something more important happened. The excuses stopped. Before leaving, David asked if he could come back the following weekend. Alone. Just the two of us. I smiled and told him I would like that. Jennifer stood near the front door holding her purse. For a moment, it looked as though she wanted to say something more. Eventually, she simply nodded and quietly said goodbye. After they left, I walked back into the dining room. The folder still sat on the table. So did the unopened gift bag from the cruise. I picked it up and carried it into the kitchen. Inside was a small snow globe featuring the ship they had traveled on. I looked at it for a moment and then placed it on a shelf beside several family photographs. Not because the cruise mattered, because it was now part of the story, a reminder of what had happened and what I had learned. Over the following months, several things changed. Some relationships grew stronger. Others remained distant. That was all right. Healing does not always happen evenly. What mattered was that I stopped waiting for other people to define my place in the family. I began spending more time with friends. I joined a local book club. I started volunteering at the community center twice a week. For the first time in years, my calendar filled with plans that belonged entirely to me. Then, 6 months after my 65th birthday, the doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon. When I opened the door, I found David standing there holding a birthday cake. Behind him stood several relatives. Susan was there. A few cousins were there. Even some family members who had quietly drifted away over the years had returned. "We are a little late," David said with a nervous smile. "About 6 months late." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. As everyone gathered around the dining room table, I looked at the empty chair that had haunted me on my birthday. It was no longer empty. Neither was the room. More importantly, neither was my heart. Turning 65 had not taught me that family is perfect. It taught me something far more valuable. Respect must be protected. Boundaries matter. And the people who truly care about you will eventually show up, even if it takes them longer than it should. That afternoon, surrounded by people who had finally chosen honesty over convenience, I made a wish before blowing out the candles. Not for revenge, not for validation, just for peace. And for the first time in a very long while, I already had it.